It is the Awesemo MLB Live Before Lock show, sponsored by Prize Picks. And I'm sure, as everybody is aware, there is NFL Thursday Night Football tonight, and it's not the best game in the world, but still it's where a lot of the attention is, kind of reducing the overall size of the MLB slates. But that aside, I am determined to give you guys some winning stacks, some top pitchers on the slate to go through, and that was for you, Jordan. But first, and most importantly, Adam, how are you doing today?
Not quite as determined as you, more so just, here so I don't get fined, but I'll still talk about baseball for, the next 45 minutes or whatever we're supposed to do. So I do think this is a pretty interesting slate to talk about. I told Josh this morning, it's one of those slates that I think is really fun to play and really difficult to talk about on shows because it just turns into a lot of, oh yeah, I mean, this team is good. They're okay. Whatever. It's just, there's not a lot of really good pitching, but there's not a lot of really bad pitching. A lot of the offensive teams good offensive teams are in tough spots. So I do really like playing these slates. It's a challenge to talk about sometimes, though.
And I mean, always is a good barometer is when you look at the ownership in our top pitcher tool. It's like, oh, Rich Hill is projected to be in over 50% of DraftKings lineups. That's something that I would not expect to normally be the case. And then at the high end, it's like, who's there to pay up for? Oh, my least favorite pitcher in all baseball, Robbie Ray, who is just a 110% left on base rate. Everybody gets on base on him. Never ends up scoring, even though he gives up a bunch of hard contact. He's been walking some guys as of late. But let's just start there with Robbie Ray, who has a very difficult matchup against the Yankees. However, there aren't that many other guys to pay up for on the slate. So we've got Robbie Ray at 10,000 on DK. He's picking up 37.5% ownership, but that's more or less in line with his odds of being a top scoring pitcher on the slate. We have him projected with 33.6% chance to be a top two scoring pitcher. Over on FanDuel, Robbie Ray, 8.4% projected ownership, 12.1% chance to be a top scoring pitcher. So I certainly don't like the matchup against the Yankees, but I kind of feel Robbie Ray is a necessary evil, as he is on almost every slate he pitches, because he always gets lucky and there's never any other good pitchers when he pitches.
Yeah, and the other thing working in his favor is this is a little bit of a watered-down Yankees lineup. No Joey Gallo. Luke Voit just hit the injured list. So it takes some strikeouts out of the lineup when you take out Luke Voit's 25% strikeout percentage against left-handed pitching. Joey Gallo's at 38%. But it also takes two of the most dangerous hitters in this lineup out. So it's still a dangerous lineup, but not quite as deep as it normally would be. The top of the order is still difficult to strike out with LeMahieu and Rizzo. But then Judge, Stanton, easier to strike out. Torres is tough. Sanchez strikes out. Gardner's tough, but he sucks. The bottom of the order is whatever with Urshela and Higashioka. Not the easiest bottom of the lineup, but not guys you're really scared of. But it's also I'm still not comfortable with this spot for Ray. It's not like it's difficult to see how he would struggle. It's still a good Yankees lineup, but the slate is just so thin on pitching. Like you were saying, it's not like there's really good alternatives at the top. When you look at the guys around him, Shane Bieber is probably going to throw 60 fewer pitches. So that's not really an option. It's Lance McCullers is getting ownership. He's got a tough matchup as well. There's just nothing really at the top that is where there's good fully stretched out pitchers in good matchups. And then even in the mid-range, there's not really good pitchers so much as there's middle of the road pitchers in good matchups. There's just not that many guys that you realistically want to go to here. So it's a spot where I'm sure I will get to Robbie Ray. I'm not going to feel really confident in it, but there's just not that many options. It is a spot where it's nice if you're a 150 max player. You can certainly get plenty of the Yankees on the other side and sort of, for lack of a better word, hedge your Robbie Ray exposure.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about some of those other guys, you mentioned Shane Bieber. He's just a write-off for me. I get there aren't that many pitching options at the high end, but there's no reason for him to even be pitching at this time of the year. He missed almost the entire season with a shoulder injury. He came back last game, only pitched a very limited amount of pitches in the inning, so I don't think he's going to go deep enough into the game to matter when he's priced up at 9,800. But some of these other guys here, we've got Lance McCullers, who you mentioned, who not only is it a tough matchup against the Tampa Bay Rays, there's no reason for Houston to really extend him to throw big pitches either, which is a concern for me. Then we've got Joe Ryan. He's at 9,300. Of those guys, do either of them really stand out to you as potential pivots off of Robbie Ray?
McCullers and Ryan?
Yeah, of the two of them.
Yeah, I mean, McCullers is getting almost as much ownership on DraftKings, and he's another one, it makes sense. He's a good pitcher. He has about a 27% strikeout percentage this year. Tampa Bay's active roster has a 24% strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. But they're also really good. They have I think they're tied for the best WRC plus when I looked earlier against right-handed pitching this year. And so it's a situation where if McCullers is on top of his game, he certainly can have success here. He's very, very good at getting ground balls, has a 55+% ground ball percentage this year. The issue is just that the margin for error is pretty small when you walk as many guys as McCullers does. You run the risk of putting guys on base for a lineup that has tons of power and will most likely take advantage if he's not on top of his game. So I think he's in a very, very similar spot to Robbie Ray. Joe Ryan, I think, is in the best spot of the three. The issue you run into with him is I don't have any confidence he's going more than 5 innings in this game. In his most recent start against the Cubs, he was pulled after 5 innings at 86 pitches, 11 strikeouts, 2 earned runs. That's a spot where normally you get another inning. If your team is interested in doing so. The start before that, he was pulled at 67 or 69 pitches after 5 innings, only 1 earned run. Certainly a spot where most pitchers get that 6th inning. So certainly not set in stone that they're pulling him after 5 innings, but that's kind of my expectation here, is that they're just looking to get Joe Ryan 5 more innings under his belt and wrap up the year. He's been very, very good. He has a 32% strikeout percentage in his 4 starts with the Twins. He struck out 92 guys in the numbers in the deep dive, and I forgot it off the top of my head. 92 guys in, I still can't find it. A lot less than 92 innings at AAA. 66 total innings at AAA, 92 strikeouts, 12 walks. Did really well there for Tampa Bay, did really well with Minnesota in their minor league system. He's done well in the majors, and now he's got a favorable matchup against the Tigers. I think he's a good option. I do like that he's pulling half the ownership of McCullers and basically a third of the ownership of Ray, but the concern for me, I guess, is that when you think about it in terms of if Ray pitches well and or if McCullers pitches well, I think both of those guys have a bit longer leash than Ryan does if he pitches well. But at the same time, both of those guys are in really scary matchups and getting a lot of ownership, whereas Ryan's getting a lot less.
Yeah, it's funny because I kind of look at the opposite way, where I think just because of the price point and the restrictions we've seen on Joe Ryan, I don't think he's going to go out and throw 7 innings that have massive upside, but I think he's pretty safe in this spot against the Tigers. Like, I don't see there being, obviously anything's possible, but I don't think the most likely scenario is that he goes out and just gets totally bombed. Whereas that is a very live option with Robbie Ray and Lance McCullers. So the number one way I think that Joe Ryan is most likely to land in an optimal lineup is he just scores 18 to 20 fantasy points, and Robbie Ray and Lance McCullers both kind of get shelled in their respective spots. So that's what stands out to me with Joe Ryan. That also, like you mentioned, only 14% projected ownership compared to 28% ownership going to Lance McCullers, 37.5 to Robbie Ray. All things considered, though, I still think Robbie Ray, amongst the high-end guys, is the player to get the most exposure to. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think he's the highest projected guy. Refreshing our projections right now. But yeah, we have him at 21 DraftKings points. Next is McCullers at 17.9, Ryan at 15.8. Obviously, you can kind of you can say what you want about the exact numbers, but directionally, I think that's pretty much going to be the consensus, is that Ray is the number 1 guy, and I think that's why you're seeing the most ownership go to him out of that group as well. So I'm with you as far as he will most likely be my highest owned guy. I would expect that as far as my exposures compared to the field, I think there's a good chance that I'm more overweight on Joe Ryan than I am on Robbie Ray.
Yeah, that's reasonable, especially considering, like we said before, we've got Joe Ryan only projected for 14% ownership. That's a number I definitely think Lawrence being over the top of. And then Robbie Ray, 37.5% ownership. Right now, I'm a little bit underweight to Ray, and I actually also like the Yankees stacks a little bit, but we'll talk more about that later. But here's somebody whose ownership that I really don't understand, and that's Ian Anderson, only projected for 8.7% ownership today on DK. Over on FanDuel, Ian Anderson only projected for 2.8% ownership. Both sites, I think he's going just totally overlooked. And Ian Anderson's had a good season. I think there was a really strong overreaction to some poor outings that he had when he first came back from the injured list. But now recent outings for Ian Anderson, he struck out 8 hitters, 7 hitters, and 9 hitters in his last 3 starts. I don't really see any reason to think he's going to be crazy restricted after he went 7 innings last time. So what reason do you think it is that we're just not seeing much ownership go to Ian Anderson on a thin pitching slate?
The only 2 things I can sort of think of are that, one, it's an awkward price tag when you have Rich Hill and Nick Pavetta $1,400 less on DraftKings, and then you're basically just sacrificing 1 batter to get from Anderson to Robbie Ray or McCullers or Ryan, because they're not that much more expensive. The other thing would be that Philadelphia is a really difficult team to strike out when you look pretty much top to bottom in this lineup. It's not the best lineup in terms of production, but since the start of the 2019 season, 17.5% strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching for Herrera, 14% for Segura. Harper strikes out just shy of 22% of the time. Brad Miller's at 26%, which is nice. But Real Muto is at, I think, 22.5%. Torres rather is at 11%. Didi Gregorius is at 14.5%. It's just a really, really tough team to strike out. All of that said, though, I agree with you that I think Anderson is going under-owned relative to his chances of success. I'd said this morning we had him projected at like 10 or 12%, that I thought that was too low, and then it's gone down since then. So I think that, even if it doesn't come in at exactly 8%, let's say it comes in at 13 or 14%, I feel the same way. It's just a good pitcher. I think his strikeout percentage for the season is a little bit artificially lowered because of those two starts after the injury where he struck out 0 hitters in Coors Field and then struck out 0 hitters against the Giants. That pulls it down a little bit, but he's still at 23.9% for the season, 3.83 xFIP. And as you said, he's had 3 straight starts now where the strikeouts were there for him. So on a slate where I'm not confident in Ray, I'm not confident in the McCullers. Ryan, I like the matchup, but he has his own issues. I don't really see a reason why Ian Anderson isn't getting more ownership, because as far as talent goes, he's better than Rich Hill. He's better than Nick Pavetta. He's not as good as Ray, McCullers, and possibly Ryan, but they all have their issues tonight too. So I don't really know why Anderson's just getting overlooked.
Yeah, right now, relative to ownership, Ian Anderson, unless something changes, he's my favorite tournament pitcher on the slate. He's pitched well as of late. And then, those games where he didn't pitch well, I think there are excuses to be made. One of them was in Colorado in Coors Field. That's always somewhat of a pass. And the other one was against the Giants. And it was his first time pitching in nearly 2 months because he was on the injured list. So he struggles in those 2 outings. And was like, oh, well, I guess Ian Anderson just sucks now. So we're not, well, he was pretty popular in that start against the Marlins, ended up striking out 9 in 5 innings. And then 7 strikeouts, like I said, in the 5 2/3 against San Francisco. And yeah, I think this is another spot on thin pitching that I'm going to want to go back to Ian Anderson. And then also, we're talking about some of the other ownership here, and we have to bring up the Rich Hill thing. But first, I want to address that Arcathels had asked in the YouTube chat if we're going to be on until MLB lock. We are not. The reason being because there is the NFL slate today. So there's the NFL Deeper Dive and the NFL Live Before Lock coming up after us. So guys, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel when you know all the shows are starting and whatnot, when they go live. Another thing also, we hit 60,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel today. My personal goal was 60,007, but 60,000, that's cool also. But either way, we're doing a giveaway for it. We're giving away 12 free months of Awesemo Plus to celebrate hitting 60,000 subscribers. Click the linked pinned, I guess the linked pin message in YouTube chat to enter our Twitter giveaway for a chance to win one of 6 passes being given away. Like the tweet on Twitter, follow Awesemo at Awesemo_com and at Awesemo odds to be eligible. And they're also going to be giving away 6 free months live later on during the football show. So check those out as well. And then click on that linked message at the top of the YouTube chat. But let's talk about Rich Hill now, because price point wise and matchup wise, it makes sense. I understand why everybody's getting a Rich Hill. He's only 7,000 against the Marlins. 50+% ownership seems really egregious to me. So I'm going to bring this up to you in 2 points. Number one, do you think his ownership is actually going to be over 50% on DraftKings? We saw something similar with Colin Walker, and then he just wasn't really owned that much.
I don't think I wouldn't be surprised, I guess I should say, if it doesn't come in that high. It's another one where I expect it to be directionally accurate. I think he's the highest owned pitcher. I don't know that it gets to 53%, but for the sake of the conversation, kind of like we were just saying with Anderson, even if it's 40, 42%, it's the same gist. It's a middle of the road pitcher in a phenomenal spot, very similar to the Taijuan Walker spot yesterday. And I think, as you were saying, we saw it yesterday where pretty much no matter where you looked at projections, Taijuan Walker projected as the clear top, point per dollar pitcher, but there's still just some level of people refusing to play Taijuan Walker. And you'll probably see something similar where, at some point people just are like, or there's enough people where it's just like, okay, I'm not playing a popular Rich Hill, where maybe it just does come in a little bit lower than we're projecting. But either way, he's going to be really popular. It's also a really good spot. So it's still just, you sort of have to weigh, he's one of the, if not the best point per dollar pitching options in this matchup, with the fact that he's a middle of the road pitcher with a 22.5% strikeout percentage, 4.63 xFIP, and somewhere around 40 to 50% of the field probably is going to have him in their lineups on DraftKings. So whether or not it gets to that exact, right now we have him at 53%, I think the conversation is pretty much the same.
Yeah. And I mean, also with Rich Hill, something we've seen in recent starts of the match, it's kind of weird that it's progressed this way, but Rich Hill's pitch counts were really restrictive when he first came with the Mets. And it's not that I'm expecting to go 7 or 8 innings or anything, but Rich Hill has pitched 5+ innings in all but one start since August 21st. Whereas his first few starts with the Mets, he pitched, it was 3 innings and one of them 3 2/3 innings. He was really restrictive. And now that his recent starts, 5 innings, 4 2/3, 5 innings, 6 innings, 6 innings, 5 innings, 5 innings, give them a better chance to rack up fantasy points, get some more outs, but then also actually get the win bonus, which was something we weren't seeing as much from him when he first made his Mets debut. Now, why the Mets are pitching Rich Hill at this point of the season, who knows? This team has been, crazy disappointing over the course of the year. You think at this point of the year, maybe give a young guy a look who might be on the team next year. Not, let's see what Rich Hill has left in the gas tank for no reason whatsoever. But it's a good matchup for him against the Marlins. And I would have really undercut his ownership if I felt really confident that he was going to be over 50% owned. But I think I'm just a little spooked by what happened with Taijuan Walker yesterday, to where I was like, I don't want to get to Taijuan Walker and he's projected for 40% ownership. And then the ownership actually comes out and it's like, oh, Taijuan Walker's 18% owned or 19. I forgot what the exact number was. And it was like, I wish I had a bunch of Taijuan Walker. So not the exact number, but like a roundabouts, where would you feel comfortable playing Rich Hill percentage-wise across 150 lineups?
So what it really comes down to for me is where I end up on bats. And it was the same thing with Taijuan Walker yesterday. I ended up playing a lot of Taijuan Walker, even though, like you said, we thought he was going to be more popular than he was. I didn't love the idea of getting to a 40% owned Walker, just like I don't love the idea of getting to a potentially 50% owned Hill. But what it came down to yesterday was I didn't play the Red Sox for the most part. I didn't play the Red Sox in tournaments. I didn't play the Twins. I was on teams like, I don't even remember now, but Milwaukee, Tampa Bay, Houston, teams that just weren't getting any ownership. So there was no reason for me not to have Taijuan Walker at that point, because he did project as the best point per dollar option and he let me get a bunch of good bats. So I'm not going into this even really viewing it as like, where do I want to get on Rich Hill? It's more so, do I end up getting to, for example, the Red Sox again? If I end up heavy on the Red Sox, I can almost guarantee I'm under the field on Rich Hill, because I'm just not going to play a bunch of lineups that have both Rich Hill and the Red Sox. If I end up not getting to the Red Sox, I will probably be around the field on Rich Hill, just because there's no real reason for me to avoid Rich Hill if I'm going to, some low owned stack and a low owned secondary stack with it.
Yeah, and I was hoping you would have said that you were high on the Dodgers yesterday, because you're like, oh, that would have worked out well if you got to Taijuan Walker with the Dodgers, because the Dodgers, who Max Scherzer was massively disappointing, but the Dodgers offense, which was kind of stagnant through most of the middle innings, all of a sudden then you get to the later innings and just every hitter homers in a row for the Dodgers, and they end up winning a game that they had no business winning. But that's a case that probably isn't going to happen quite again. But anyway, in hindsight, yesterday's optimal lineup definitely wanted to be Taijuan Walker and Dodgers stacks. But let's walk through some of these other cheap pitching options on the slate, because somebody else that's also really popular, not quite as popular as Rich Hill, but Nick Pavetta pitching against the Baltimore Orioles, also a game the Red Sox are absolutely in must-win sort of situations, which, who knows what that means with Nick Pavetta in terms of the actual outcome. However, I think this means that if he's pitching well, he's probably going to get a longer leash than normal. If Nick Pavetta comes out and struggles right off the bat, I think the Red Sox might have a really quick hook with him, given where they are in the playoff standings. But Nick Pavetta versus Rich Hill relative to their ownerships, which do you think is a better GPP option?
If you have popular bats, I would go to Pavetta because he's projected for like half the ownership. If you don't have popular bats, I still prefer Hill. I just think he projects better. The matchup against Miami is better. I'm not even sure exactly what to make of the fact that it's a must-win for the Red Sox. I completely agree with you that if Pavetta struggles out of the gate, he might be gone. He might be done real quick. But if he gives you like 5 good innings, I think there's still a chance that they just go to the bullpen. We've already seen Alex Cora in a lot of situations avoid giving guys that third time through the order. I wouldn't be surprised if they just don't have that much confidence in Pavetta and they just sort of say, look, like, thank you for those 5 innings and we're going to get you out before you blow it. So I'm not even confident that he's good enough that they let him keep going out there. Like, if it were Sale or Evaldi or something like that, I think that they would just keep pitching. But I think there's a chance at least that even if he's pitching well, they're just like, look, you're done. That was your 5 innings. Now get the hell out before you make this worse.
Yeah, and I think that's also going to depend a little bit by what does the offense do. If he has a really cushy lead, maybe then they'll be a little bit more cautious with him. I just kind of view it's probably a little bit more of a high variance situation with Nick Pavetta than we would normally see if it was the middle of the season, because there's nothing the Red Sox are saving they're really trying to save arms for the bullpen or anything like that. I think they're doing everything possible to win this game and almost playing like a playoff type game against the Baltimore Orioles. In terms of other cheap pitching options on the slate, there's a lot of them to look at. The one that I gravitate towards the most is actually going to be the cheap pitcher on the other side of Rich Hill. That's Edward Cabrera. And Cabrera's results so far this year at the big league level, it's not like he's been lights out or anything, but he's a really well-regarded prospect. He has really good stuff. He throws the ball really hard. He's young. So I'm kind of willing to look past the fact that he has a 5.79 ERA and a 9.17 expected ERA because he has really good stuff. He's really cheap on DraftKings and maybe a little bit leverage to be had just because he's on the opposite side of Rich Hill. So, hey, if Rich Hill struggles, Edward Cabrera is a little more likely to get the win. But what do you make of Edward Cabrera as a value play today? And how do you feel about his recent result?
I feel really, really bad about his recent results, that's for sure. But I'm with you as far as he's fine in tournaments, just because there's such a limited number of pitchers on this slate that have any semblance of talent and or are stretched out enough that if they're pitching well, we can get 5 or 6 innings out of them. We have seen 76, 79, 75 pitches the last 3 times out from Cabrera. He hasn't been particularly efficient, only going 3, 4, and 3 2/3 innings. But if he's pitching well, I think you could, and he throws around 80 pitches, that can get you 5 innings or so. He's really cheap on DraftKings. I don't have any amount of confidence he pitches well, but there's not a whole lot on the slate that I do have confidence in as far as pitching goes. So I don't mind getting to him a little bit. I don't think the price tag is going to be super necessary when you do have Pavetta and Hill, and you have Kyle Gibson, who I don't like, but he's still relatively cheap. I don't think that the $5,600 price tag is going to be as important on this slate as it would be if like we had a Coors Field game that was appropriately priced or something like that. But he does have talent. It hasn't shown up yet in the major leagues. He only has a 20% strikeout, 20.5% strikeout percentage in his starts with Miami. But in the minor leagues this year, he made 6 starts at AAA, struck out 37.2% of hitters. He made 5 starts at AA, struck out 34% of hitters. Like you said, he's a highly regarded prospect, number 3 in Miami system, number 41 overall, according to FanGraphs. He's got good stuff. All you're asking is that he happens to have a good start at 5% ownership on a slate with really weak pitching. That's not a spot that I mind getting to, not somebody I expect to have 30, 40% of or anything like that. But I do think that he's a good option as long as the ownership's low because of the upside that he potentially offers.
And to me, that's the other thing too, is, I just look at our top pitchers tool and some of the ownership that's going to these guys. And at least in terms of projections right now, we have Rich Hill projected for over 50% ownership. We have Nick Pavetta projected for over 30% ownership. I don't really like those particular ownership figures on those guys. And that's when I really start to look at, all right, who are the other cheap pitching options I want to get to? And then I go, none of them. These are all either bad pitchers or pitchers in bad spots or pitchers with limited upside. At least with Edward Cabrera, it's a pitcher with really good stuff who I assume has upside just based on the minor league performances. And then also you could say, he's only made 6 big league starts. There's a lot of variability that could happen there. He's still throwing hard. So is there anybody else amongst this cheap price range? Also, I have to answer. So Jordan was a little confused because he's looking at the slate. He goes, "Is that the same Scott Kazmir from 20 years ago?" Not only is it the same Scott Kazmir from 20 years ago, he is somehow is he the biggest favorite on the slate today? Yeah. So not only is it the same Scott Kazmir that came up through baseball minor league systems forever ago when I was a kid at summer camp. He is the biggest favorite on the entire slate today, minus 226 pitching at home, which really goes to show how wonky of a pitching slate this is. But I can't get behind Scott Kazmir or Madison Bumgarner or Angel Zerpa or Vince Velazquez. All of these guys, to me, are just kind of suck. At least with Cabrera, there's an unknown factor where there is upside. I know for sure that guys like Scott Kazmir and Madison Bumgarner are not good at this point in their career. So is there any other cheap pitching option with low ownership that you actually do like to get overweight to the field to outside of Edward Cabrera?
Yeah. And just one other thing to mention with Cabrera too, and you made this point when we talked about, I think it was Joe Ryan, there's a pretty decent chance that if you get 15 or 16 pitcher points on this slate, that's a winner. All you really need is Ray and McCullers to have mediocre starts. And there's a pretty good chance that, sub 20 points is fine, especially at that price tag. So you don't need to look at Cabrera I don't think he can get 25 points. This just doesn't strike me as that kind of slate. So there's that. Kazmir and Bumgarner, I think if you're playing 150 lineups, have a role for basically the same reason as Cabrera. It's unlikely they pitch well, but it's a 1-game sample. They are in a very, very good pitcher's park. Kazmir, like you said, is a huge favorite through 71 pitches last time out. You're not expecting either one to do well, but it has to happen once. And it has to happen in 1 game. And that's certainly possible. We have them both projected around 9%, 9 to 10% chance of being top 2 pitcher. Bumgarner getting 2% ownership, Kazmir getting 5.5%. So in 150 lineups, I expect that I'll have some. In 3 max, I wouldn't be getting there. There's not much else at the bottom for me, though. Zerpa, I'm not expecting to go particularly deep into this game. He's 4K, but this isn't a slate where I think the salary really matters all that much. Alexander Wells, I'm not interested in going to against the Red Sox. Skubal has taken the Casey Mize path where he's throwing like 3 innings, like 40 to 50 pitches. So can't really see getting there. Yeah, I mean, amongst the cheap guys, Cabrera is my favorite, just because he at least has talent.
And it's by process of elimination. It's not even that I think he's some great play points per dollar. It's just I look through the other options. Like if ownership was out of consideration, I can only play one guy. It would be Rich Hill, and I certainly think Rich Hill and Nick Pavetta are safer plays than Edward Cabrera. But then once I start factoring in ownership, I just kind of start knocking guys off where it's like, all right, Rich Hill overowned, Nick Pavetta overowned, Kyle Gibson, no strikeout upside. Scott Kazmir was washed up 15 years ago. Madison Bumgarner washed up 5 years ago. And then you just kind of get to this point where it's like, all right, by default, Edward Cabrera becomes the guy. You mentioned Angel Zerpa. He was somebody I looked at for a second, but oh boy, was his minor league numbers an adventure this year. Hit AA for Zerpa, 5.96 ERA, 4.43 FIP. He did strikeout guys, so that's a positive. But like you said, I don't think there's a real need to save that much salary pitcher today on DraftKings. And his results were so poor in the minor leagues that it's hard for me to really reasonably think of him as a good option at the big league level.
He's also thrown a total of 1 1/3 innings above AA in his career. He's thrown 46 2/3 innings above high A. This is a guy who he's only 22. Maybe he's and he turned 22 3 days ago. So he's essentially 21. He maybe is going to be good at some point in the future. He's really, really young, but this is a minor league pitcher right now that the Royals are just throwing out there against the Indians.
And I think, the only other pitcher that I do actually think warrants being a little bit overweight to the field too is Corey Kluber. The matchup for him is absolutely brutal, but he's only projected for 2% ownership in a spot against Toronto where if getting overweight to 2% of Corey Kluber, I think that's easy enough to do. Not a real confident or strong play, but over the course of 150 lineups, if you have around 10% of Corey Kluber, that's what we have as the top 2 chance of him, odds of him being a top 2 pitcher on the slate. We have him at 10%. So I think the 2% ownership's a little bit low, but do you have any strong Corey Kluber takes?
No, I mean, I don't disagree with you where on a slate with dicey pitching, pretty much any pitcher that is fully stretched out and 2% owned, you can make a case for. I think for me, I probably definitely get the Anderson first, but probably like when you're talking about the low owned guys that I have no confidence in, I think I probably go the Kazmir, Bumgarner, Cabrera route before Kluber, just because for one, their matchups, particularly Kazmir and Cabrera, are certainly better. Bumgarner's is probably marginally better, but also you're saving $2,000. So I think I probably get to those guys. It's just one of those situations where at 2%, I wouldn't be surprised if in 150 lineups I have more than 2%, but I also wouldn't be surprised if I just have literally 0 Kluber. So it's not a spot I feel strong about at all. I think it's an awful spot. The Blue Jays don't strike out. They have tons and tons of power. Kluber at this point in his career is not very good, but again, he's fully stretched out and he's 2% owned. So it's not like it's a bad play. It's just one that I kind of doubt that I get to.
Yeah, and then just bringing up, because we had Rona 4489, he had brought up Gonsolin in the chat. Here's the problem with Gonsolin. He's fairly expensive and he just doesn't throw enough pitches for me to think there's legitimate upside. I get that he ended up churning out 23 fantasy points last time out against Arizona. By the way, the time before that against Arizona, he also pitched well, but here are his pitch counts in his recent starts. 68 pitches, 37, 67, 55, 55. I just can't pitch somebody at 8,800 on ZK when I think they're probably going to throw less than 70 pitches. Is that where you're at with Gonsolin as well?
Yeah, if he were like 7K or something, and I could just say, okay, all I need is, him to beat Rich Hill and beat Nick Pavetta, then it becomes kind of reasonable because those guys are certainly capable of just having bad starts. But at 8,800, you're starting to sacrifice some offense as well. And there's other guys in this price range that are fully stretched out that aren't getting much ownership. Ian Anderson, we talked about. Kluber, I hate, but at least if he's pitching well, he's probably going deeper than Gonsolin. Kyle Gibson, we didn't really talk about. I don't like the matchup. I don't like him as a DFS pitcher, but he's only getting 8% ownership. And if he's pitching well, he's going to, go as deep as he can. So like all of those guys, I think from just a low owned standpoint, I would get to before Gonsolin just because when they pitch well, I think they go further into the game. And it's also not like Gonsolin has a great matchup or anything. He's not facing the Diamondbacks or the Marlins or the Pirates. He is facing the Padres. So there's a pretty decent chance that he just doesn't have a great start anyway.
Yeah, and once again, I'm just never going to really, unless there's some crazy sort of pitching situation on a slate. It's like a 3-game slate. There just isn't really a situation where I'm going to want to be playing somebody at that price point with limited pitches. And Sean V also agrees with us in the chat. So it's something that people, I think, in general, people are hip to the fact here that Tony Gonsolin not be thrown very deep into the game. And Rona is asking about for FanDuel, even more so for FanDuel, even though where he's cheaper, because the win bonus is important on FanDuel, as is the quality start bonus. And the odds of him going 6+ innings are very low. The odds of him even going 5+ innings aren't really all that high, because here are his recent outings. He's thrown 5 innings, 2 1/3 innings, 5 innings, 3 innings, 1 2/3 innings. There's almost no chance you're getting the quality start out of Gonsolin. And then even him getting the win bonus, that becomes a little sketchy when you consider that he might not make it through 5 innings. But do you feel any differently about Gonsolin when he's 7,100 on FanDuel?
No, not at all. One thing to add to that too is because you only roster the one pitcher on FanDuel, it's really easy to get actual good pitchers at low ownership. Robbie Ray is at 7.5%. He's expensive, but you can get a low owned Robbie Ray. You can get Joe Ryan at 4%. Again, there's the quality start issue with Ryan if we think there's a good chance he's only going 5 innings, but still 4% for a guy that could just strike out 10 guys in 5 innings. Ian Anderson's 3%. These are all guys that are actual good pitchers that are stretched out or are either fully stretched out or at least, can throw 85 or so pitches in Ryan's case that aren't getting much ownership. So you're kind of just sacrificing a lot with Gonsolin. You probably don't need the savings to him, all that much.
All right. Any other thoughts you have about pitcher? If not, we could move over to the offenses.
No, I think that's it. What do you have any strong opinions on Ryan Yarbrough? Somebody asked in chat. He's expected to come in after McHugh. He threw 6 innings last time out, but really, really tough matchup against Houston. I'm not inclined to get there. He's 7,600 on DraftKings. Certainly can't go there on FanDuel with him not starting. But on DraftKings at 7,600, I could see the case where maybe he does better than Hill and Pavetta, but I would still rather just roll the dice on guys that are actually starting, because with Yarbrough, not only does he have the brutal matchup, but there's always the question of exactly how deep does he go as a reliever? It's not always, he just goes out there and throws 6 innings.
And sometimes the Rays end up bringing somebody else as a long relief pitcher, and then he doesn't pitch at all. But the other thing to consider too is the Rays just have nothing to play for right now. Where you look at their spot in the standings, they've locked up the AL East, and they are currently, let's see, I'll bring up the standings right here.
6 games up on the Astros.
Yeah, they're 8 games up on the Yankees. They're 6 games up on the Astros. So if Ryan Yarbrough, there's no reason to say hey, we need Ryan Yarbrough to go out and throw 80, 90 pitches. So I kind of think they're going to be limiting everybody a little bit at this point in the season. So something else to consider there. But yeah, I'm not going to be on Ryan Yarbrough. I don't mind the thought process though. It's not going to be some crazy take that I'm going to poo-poo on or anything.
Yeah, if you want to, especially if you're playing 150 lineups, if you want to throw some Yarbrough in, it's not like it's bad. It's pretty tough to make bad pitching plays on this particular slate because pretty much every pitcher that you would typically call bad is also low owned, and it makes them fine. But yeah, I personally don't think I'll get Yarbrough.
All right, so we are going to move over to the offenses. But first, guys, today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you guys are new to Prize Picks, these are prop-based daily fantasy sports contests, and they have everything over there. They've got esports. They had disc golf up there the other day during the Olympics. They had all kinds of Olympic sports also. So they have everything, and you could parlay them together to build different prop cards. A really fun way to play daily fantasy sports, especially if you happen to have knowledge in some of these off sports. I imagine the lines are probably not all that efficient, because I don't know who's making efficient lines for highlight. So lots of different knowledges to be pulled in here. Definitely fun things to play daily fantasy sports on. Also, most importantly, if you're making your first deposit on Prize Picks, if you use the promo code Awesemo, you get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit, and that's a pretty good way to start building your bankroll over at Prize Picks. That is promo code Awesemo for a $100 bonus on your first deposit. So moving over to the stacks now, and I think right where we have to start is going to be with the Boston Red Sox, who for the second consecutive day are going to be the chalk team of the slate. Yesterday, we had them projected for over 20% ownership. They ended up being massively popular. They also failed in that chalk spot. But I think this is a different spot for them today for this reason. Yesterday, when we were talking about the merits of the Boston Red Sox on Live Before Lock in the Deeper Dive, they were projected for over 20% ownership with, if I remember, it was a 13 or 14% chance to be a top stack. Today, we have them projected for a 19.9% chance to be a top stack but an 18.7% projected ownership share. I think that we still want to be a little cautious with how popular the pitchers are we roster with Boston, but I think this is a spot where the Red Sox actually do look like a very favorable stack to get to.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to get to the Red Sox today than I was yesterday. It's just a smaller slate. You lost 4 games, so there's 8 less offenses you have to compete with. There's still some really bad offenses on the slate, like Miami, like the Tigers, amongst others, the Diamondbacks. So it's just a much smaller slate, and it makes it so we have the ownership projected about the same, but it makes Boston a lot more likely to be the top stack than they were yesterday. I thought there was a chance that you would see Boston's ownership also increase with the smaller slate, but we don't have it projected that way. There's enough other good spots to get to, I guess, that they're pretty much holding where they were. So like you said, it comes back to, you still want to pay attention to what your overall lineup looks like. I don't anticipate playing a bunch of like Nick Pavetta plus Rich Hill plus Boston stacks anywhere outside of cash, but in tournaments, there's no reason why I can't go Ian Anderson plus Joe Ryan plus Boston, or Anderson plus Cabrera plus Boston, and some really good one-offs, or mix in some really low-owned secondary stacks. I think that they do look better today than yesterday. Still, I haven't run lineup, so I don't know if I'll be overweight on them. But yesterday I had virtually none. I think I had on DraftKings like 1 JD Martinez lineup. I think I had like 4% Hunter Renfroe. I would expect that if I am under the field, I don't think I'll be as far under the field as I was yesterday.
Yeah, and they are a little bit negatively leveraged on FanDuel, but once again, it's not a massive deal because they're in such a better spot than any other team on the slate, where we have over on FanDuel, for instance, 18.6% chance for the Red Sox to be the top scoring team. The second best mark is the Los Angeles Angels at 9.1%. And so the other chalk team that we have on the slate, and this is one that I think really doesn't warrant too much consideration relative to ownership, and that is the Minnesota Twins. They're projected for 16.8% ownership over on FanDuel as a team. On DraftKings, we have them projected for 17.4% ownership. I guess I get that the price points are good. I get the matchup is good. I'm just not going to play the Minnesota Twins on a slate this size when they're going to be in nearly a fifth of the field's lineups.
Yeah, I think the way I see Minnesota is I'm less likely to get to them than I am Boston, just because I think Boston is still in the better spot. Tariq Skubal gives up a lot of power, but he also has really good strikeout stuff. He's probably, like we said earlier, going 3 or 4 innings. Then you get a bullpen game, which, when it's the Tigers bullpen, on one hand, it does give you upside, but on the other hand, we know that targeting bullpens just isn't that appealing of a situation typically. So all of the ownership going to Minnesota, I think, is a little bit less appealing to me than the ownership that's going to Boston. But there are some really, really good value options here. Mitch Garver, I think, is either the best or one of the best catcher options at 4K. Same thing can be said for Donaldson at third base. Buxton, one of the top outfield plays. Sano, a really good first base option. We also lost Bobby Dahlbeck, not in the lineup for the Red Sox. So I think it's going to make Sano look even better. So I'm still fine using some Minnesota bats, like as a one-off or a 3-man, but sort of like we were saying with Boston, I think you want to pay close attention to what your lineup looks like. I doubt I run a lot of Boston paired with Minnesota. But if I'm stacking, I don't know, who do we have low owned? Like if I'm stacking the Blue Jays, just because they work for this scenario, I don't have any issue with using like a Miguel Sano, Josh Donaldson, Mitch Garver 3-man combined with the Jays, because if the Jays go off, I kind of just am already at the top. So it still matters where you're going, but I think it's gonna be tough to, it's pretty unappealing to me to 5-man stack Minnesota, I think, just because with the exception of Brent Rooker, who's batting 7th, and Kepler batting 5th, there's not really guys in this lineup that I want that are low owned. Sano is 18%, Donaldson's 19, Polanco's 20, Garver 27, Buxton 32. I don't really want Andrelton Simmons. I don't really want Arias. So it's a pretty tough team to 5-man stack in a contrarian way.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. And then once again, the difference between the Red Sox and the Twins in terms of ownership is the Red Sox have double the actually triple the odds of being the top scoring team on the slate, whereas the ownership is comparable between them and Minnesota. And it's pretty hard to reduce the ownership share on the Twins. I just don't really think it's warranted there. But let's talk about some of the low-owned stacks. And this is going to be a surprise to nobody. For the third consecutive slate, I like the Yankees as a contrarian stack, and it's not something I expected to necessarily pay off last night against Jose Barrios. It wasn't something I necessarily expected to pay off the night before against Hyun-Jin Ryu when it did. It's a low probability stack for the Yankees against Robbie Ray. However, Robbie Ray is massively popular. I like the leverage we're getting there. The Yankees offense, there is a ton of firepower and a lot of hitters that hit left-handed pitching really well. And then still, I look at Robbie Ray's numbers this year. Overall, he's been good. I think it's kind of overstated the amount that I say that Robbie Ray hasn't been good this year, but it's all relative to perception, where it's like I look at the numbers for Robbie Ray and he hasn't been nearly as good as his 2.68 ERA suggests. The reason being, he has a 3.41 expected ERA, 3.42 FIP. Robbie Ray is a 276 BABIP, an 89.6% strand rate. Depending how today's start goes, he could become the first pitcher in baseball history to have a strand rate over 90% over the full course of the season. So Robbie Ray's benefited from a lot of good luck this year, and I still think there's some variance there, and I want to get to the power right-handed bats of the Yankees against him.
Yeah, I mean, I think Robbie Ray is really, really good. But for one, he's popular, and for two, whenever the Yankees are 1% home, they're a good tournament play. They just have so much power in this lineup. The lineup not as good as it could have been. Again, if you had Gallo and Voit in here, it would be even better. But since the start of the 2019 season, DJ LeMahieu 182 expected ISO against left-handed pitching. Rizzo's at 153. Judge 337. Stanton 241. Torres 225. Gary Sanchez 259. Urshela 190. Higashioka 307. There's still tons and tons of power in this lineup. Ray's home run numbers, just as a side note, for the season, he's allowed 1.39 home runs per nine. That is skewed because he's pitched a lot of his home games in Dunedin and Buffalo, which were extremely hitter-friendly parks. Now you have 58-degree weather in Toronto, so not nearly as hitter-friendly, but still someone that, it's facing a lineup that has tons of power at no ownership. So on the one hand, you get basically just unowned Yankees, where you're saying if the Yankees happen to score a lot of runs, I'm going to not have much competition at the top of tournaments. And then on top of that, also, if the Yankees score a lot of runs, 30 to 35% of the field, it doesn't matter what offenses they have because they have Robbie Ray and they're useless. So the Yankees, I think, are a very strong tournament stack.
Yeah, and that is, there's a lot of teams who rate out as positively leveraged, which is going to happen when it's not a small slate. But when you have an average size slate and one team like the Minnesota Twins is projected for nearly 20% ownership with only 6% chance to be a top stack, when that happens, there's going to be so many teams that rate out as positively leveraged. And the reason I gravitate towards the Yankees is one of those ones that's positively leveraged is just because of we're also getting the ownership, the leverage off of the ownership on Robbie Ray. So Yankees for sure to me make sense for that reason. But I also want to bring up the number one positively leveraged stack team in our projections, just because I think this might be the last live before lock you and I are doing in the regular season. And what would it be a live before lock if you and I didn't lose a little more money on the Houston Astros before we signed off for the season? Because they are projected to be the number one positive leverage stack in our top stacks tool today. Only 1.7% ownership going to Houston compared to 5.4% chance to be a top stack. It's going to be a bullpen game for the Rays, but who really knows what that means? Ryan Yarbrough is expected to come in, but we talked about the spot the Rays have in the standings, where they've already sealed up the number one seed over the Houston Astros. They've also already sealed up the AL East. I don't know if there's a real need to push their starters to go big innings or even their core relievers. They could just be playing some lesser relievers in the middle innings. So I kind of think this is a better spot to take a shot on Houston in a bullpen game than we normally are in bullpen games.
Yeah, I'm with you. And even beyond that, it's still Houston at low ownership. So I think they're fine. Their lineup is obviously really, really strong. Michael Brantley is back. He's batting seventh, so not as appealing as he normally is, but it still strengthens that lineup overall. I think I'd still rather get to some other teams. I like Atlanta a little bit more. I like the Yankees because of Ray's ownership. I like Toronto because they're Toronto, and I don't think Kluber's that good anymore. But all of that said, Houston, very, very similar to those teams, in that I don't love the matchup, but they have tons of good hitters and they're not getting much ownership.
Yeah. And there's a lot of teams like that in that kind of boat you mentioned right there with we've got the Atlanta Braves, Houston Astros, Yankees, Blue Jays, Phillies. These are all teams that have a 2.5% or more leverage score in our top stacks tool over on FanDuel. And then also similarly over on DraftKings as well. Just from a standpoint of these are teams that have good offenses that are not picking up ownership. And I'm not really sure why they're picking up so low ownership when you consider that it's not like cost is really prohibitive on this slate. When you consider Rich Hill is going to be projected for, let's see, do we have an update on Rich Hill? Is he still projected for over 50% ownership?
I haven't refreshed.
Yeah, I want to refresh to see if that's still.
I was just commenting. Somebody in chat said the Twins are a better play than the Yankees eat the ownership. Yeah, the Twins are a better play than the Yankees, of course. Like they're in a better spot. They're not facing Robbie Ray. The issue is just you have to think about what does it look like when the team that I stacked does well. Because any of these teams, Minnesota, Boston, like they're still going to fail the vast majority of the time. So you have to think if they do well, like how how well do I get paid off? And you're going to get paid off a lot more if you're on the Yankees or the Astros or the Blue Jays and they do well than if you're on the Twins and they do well, because you have so much competition that's right there with you on the Twins.
Yeah, and then Larry C posted, and thank you, said 51.6% is the most recent ownership run we have on Rich Hill. And that's what kind of trips me up here is if people are playing Rich Hill at that high of a rate, where are they spending their money? Because the expensive offenses are by and large part not owned today. The Minnesota Twins are really popular, but they're also a cheap offense. So I'm kind of, that's what confused me about the ownership projections. It's where are people spending their money if the Twins are the second most popular offense and Robbie Ray is the most popular and Rich Hill is the most popular pitcher. It just from a salary perspective, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So let's see where some of that. What's that?
Dodgers are expensive.
Yeah, the Dodgers are expensive. And
Jose Ramirez, Franmil Reyes.
And the Dodgers, an individual team who I think the ownership here is going to be a little bit inflated also based on what happened last night, where we touched on a little bit at the top of the show, where the Dodgers last night, they were like 1% owned on all their hitters across the board. And they ended up hitting like 6 or home runs or something crazy. Like, I don't know what the total number was, but they were down 9-5. And then Mookie Betts homered, Max Muncy homered, Cody Bellinger homered, Corey Seager homered. And then all of a sudden they're up in that game. But now we have the Dodgers today project for 14.4% ownership as a team with 9.1% chance to be a top stack over on FanDuel. On DraftKings, a little more reasonable ownership, 9.5% ownership share, 8.3% chance to be a top stack. How are you handling the Dodgers after they went off in such a big way yesterday?
I like getting back to him here. I'm not too concerned about the ownership because I think that it's a situation where you have Trey Turner pulling up the aggregate ownership, and because second base just isn't a very good position and Trey Turner is as good as he is, he should be really, really popular. The next highest owned guy on DraftKings, Betts at 13%, Will Smith at 12%, catcher position that's not very strong. Seager at shortstop at 10%, certainly fine. It's a team where, like, unlike Minnesota, where unless you're just going to guys that you really don't want, like Simmons and Arias, you can't really find low-owned bats. We have Max Muncy at 6%. You have Justin Turner at 4%. Chris Taylor at 3%. It's not tough to make a $5 Dodger stack that's relatively low owned. The ownership is kind of just being driven up by the best, Turner's probably the best second base play on the slate. And so that's pulling it up. But I like getting to the Dodgers. Velazquez hasn't been good whatsoever this year. And we know how good the Dodgers offense is.
Who is the, because just as a tie-in to Vince Velazquez, who is the most washed pitcher on the slate today? We have Madison Bumgarner, we have Scott Kazmir, we have Vince Velazquez, all guys who in their day, they had value as pitchers. And Velazquez is not nearly as old as those guys, but injuries and some other issues, that has really made him not the pitcher he once was. If you had to vote for which one of those guys is most washed, who gets the award?
Corey Kluber. But man, I mean, it's got to be Kazmir, right?
I kind of lean towards Bumgarner just because it's such a bigger fall for him.
But he did it sort of like gracefully, partly because he just pitches in pitcher friendly parks. He pitched in San Francisco and now he's in Chase Field. I think Velazquez had the most precipitous drop off. And unexplained. He went from like young pitcher who was volatile but had some really good stuff and really good results at times to just total gas can that like can't stay in the major leagues real quick.
Yeah, and the but average fastball velocity for Vince Velazquez over the last few years has gone from 90. But when he first got called up, he was at 95.2 with Houston. Last few years down to 94.3, 93.9. This year down to 93.4, and a lot of that's out of the bullpen too. So you have to assume not a lot of it, but he's made 4 appearances out of the bullpen. So maybe that's also been something that's kind of made the velocity numbers maybe a little higher than it should be, but. Yeah, there's for sure some very washed pitchers on this slate, and Corey Kluber is kind of a good shout out to that too, just because Corey Kluber was so ridiculously good a couple of years ago and then totally fell apart.
Yeah, like he's okay now. 4.29 xFIP, 25% strikeout percentage. He pretty quickly, and I mean I think injury related too, but pretty quickly went from like arguably best pitcher or top 5 pitcher at least in baseball to just a guy pretty quick.
And that's also why, as we bring them up there, I want to bring up one of my other favorite stacks of the day for contrarian purposes, who you also mentioned in passing earlier in the show, but the Toronto Blue Jays, who are very expensive at the high end with Vlad, Bo Bichette, Marcus Semien, George Springer, Teoscar Hernandez, but there is no ownership going here against a Corey Kluber, who, like we just said, is pretty washed at this point. Not that he's terrible, but I don't know that he's in a spot in his career where it's just like, oh, look, Corey Kluber, I guess nobody could play the Blue Jays. That certainly shouldn't be the case. So the only player with more than 1% projected ownership on Toronto is George Springer. You can stack the Blue Jays and just play whoever you want to pitch. The lineup's already contrarian enough when the Blue Jays are the offense. So I think this is a pretty good spot to get to Toronto as well. Certainly an offense I want to be overweight too.
Yeah, for sure. Just really, really talented offense. Kluber this year, 174 expected ISO to righties. It's not terrible, but it's not like he's been lights out against them. 22.3% strikeout percentage. Even the implied run total is respectable at 4.7. So as long as they're not projected for ownership, I like getting to them. And then the bottom of the order is pretty cheap as well. I mean, you do have a $2,800 Dickerson batting sixth. You have Randall Grichuk batting ninth at 2,700. You can use Kirk to cover the catcher position. He's a nice pivot away from, a popular Mitch Garver or Will Smith. And so, yeah, there's just multiple ways you can go about this team, because like you said, if you're going to the Blue Jays, the rest of your lineup doesn't matter all that much. You can use Hill, Pavetta to save money and just play all the best Blue Jays and some good one-offs. You can go, Ray Hill or Ray Pavetta, use, Corey Dickerson to save some money, so you can get Ray. There's just a bunch of different ways that you can go with this team.
All right. We only have a couple minutes left here until we're going to hand it over to the football show. So I'm going to ask Adam, do you have any kind of closing thoughts or anything you want to bring up on the slate that we have not talked about before we finish?
Just a quick reply to chat. Someone said Tom Brady's going to destroy the Patriots. If you saw that press conference, I'm not completely sure Tom Brady's alive by Sunday.
Yeah, that was he was pretty rough looking. I wonder, it's been so long since he lost a football game. It's just like he loses like 10 years off his life every time he loses. Because first game he shows up, he looked gaunt. He was barely able to talk. So
he looks like Clint Eastwood.
He was like not in
Clint Eastwood, not prime Clint Eastwood.
And by the way, Clint Eastwood also. Here's one thing that's crazy about Clint Eastwood, and you see him do interviews now, like he did. I think it was like not play-by-play, but he was in the commentary booth for a golf tournament that he's a part of last year. I was like, oh, this guy has no clue where he is. He's no clue what's going on. He could barely form sentences. And then he's like in movies and he's directing. He's the main character. I'm like, that's crazy, man. I don't understand that. But yeah, Tom Brady is not looking too hot, and we'll see how that comes. But anyway, anything you want to get off your chest before we wrap up and head over to football?
No, it should just be a pretty fun tournament slate, I think. Cash pretty straightforward. Play the Red Sox, play the Twins, play some probably on DraftKings, Hill, Pavetta, Ray possibly. But yeah, I think cash is pretty straightforward, but a pretty fun tournament slate where you can take some shots on really good offenses that don't have much ownership.
All right, guys, that is going to do it for us. On the way out the door, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got NFL Deeper Dive and NFL Live Before Lock coming up next. Also, we're giving away some Awesemo Plus Platinum packages, so stick around, watch that so you can get in on that as well.